Welcome back. In this second part of the story, we will look at how Michel Qissi saved Bloodsport movie and Jean-Claude's career with it. Once a contract between Qissi, Van Damme and Canon Group was settled, Jean-Claude and Michel went to Hong Kong to start prep work for Bloodsport movie. All in all, they had about 6 weeks to complete the shoot. While location was easy enough to find, Hong Kong was a popular place to make martial art films and they had great studios to work in. Getting the right cast of fighters was a challenge. There are usually two options to consider. Find actors and teach them basic martial art moves in hopes they will be convincing enough to fool an audience, pretty much how it's done nowadays. Or find actual good fighters and teach them how to act. Newt Arnold, the movie director, preferred the latter. And the only real actor who was invited to portray Jean-Claude's friend was Donald Richard Gibb, who played Ray Jackson. He did not have to do any fancy moves, just some bashing and kicking in typical brute fashion. The cast turned out to be fantastic. Over a dozen of great martial arts were invited to act, including Bolo Yan. Hard to find a better villain for the role. Frank Dukes was big help finding a location for the shoot. Considering the whole screenplay was based on his story or fairy tale depending on the point of view, Frank was very much invested in success of this production. Michel had big doubts about legitimacy of Frank Dukes' story, but he didn't care enough to question it. It's a movie after all, entertainment. As Qissi would say about Frank Dukes, he's like a big baby with great imagination, just like me. Bloodsport was an excellent screenplay. Real or not, it was popular and inspiring. The entire movie was shot with a single main camera and secondary B-roll camera. Make an establishing shot, then mid-range, close-in, portraits, some reaction from people in audience, and that's about it. Obviously making sure that the camera angle is set to make fight look real, obscuring fake hits and hiding false punches. Same camera will be taken off the tripod and cameraman would get it on the shoulder and jump inside the action. Bloodsport probably had the most elaborate choreography, and Qissi staged most of Jean-Claude's fight scenes, including the final fight against Bolo Yan, who played ultimate bad guy Chun-Li. Michel, being Van Damme's childhood friend, knew all his best moves and would stand behind the monitor pointing when was the best time to profile this or that move, punch, block, kicks, and famous split. There was one particular scene that Qissi asked to change. During the pre-comité test, Jean-Claude had to kill a bull with a single punch. Even for genre film it was way too much. This was not a typical martial art movie with flying ninjas and kung fu master fighting trillion of opponents at once. So Michel suggested that famous deep mark touch and destroy bricks instead of killing a bull. Also Michel found a little guy Ken Su to be their street guide Mr. Lin, to add a comedic relief and also offset the height disbalance between Jean-Claude, who was 5'9", and Donald Gibb, who was 6'4". Ken Su was in the second camera unit for B-rolls. During lunch break, Michel told Jean-Claude, pointing at Ken, "Look, this guy would actually work. Let me talk to him and see if he had done any theater or acting." Turns out Ken was more than happy to take the role. After all, any job that pays bills is very welcome. Michel's role in the movie was to play one of the fallen fighters, who would get brutally destroyed by Chun-Li. Qissi had to make Bolo look as menace as possible, heating up the audience for the main event and establishing an image of a cruel and ruthless maniac. Not only Bolo can take a hard hit, but he wouldn't hesitate to cripple or even kill his opponent as part of his intimidating tactic. That nasty leg break was a nice touch to inevitable defeat. After the shoot was done, they went back home and proceeded with the first cut. Editing film was a disaster, total catastrophe. Carl Kress was in charge of putting the cutscenes together, and he had never ever done any martial art editing in his long career. He was 60 years old at the time. Everything was wrong: the selection of clips, the sequences of moves, the order of cuts. Michel was standing behind Carl, staring at the monitor, and wanted to strangle poor guy. Qissi had the perfect vision of how every scene was supposed to look, and Carl was butchering their hard work in front of his eyes. Funny enough, Jean-Claude was actually liking Carl's version, not the first time or last time, Claude would demonstrate his poor sense of judgment, something that would eventually destroy his blossom career, but that's a story for another time. Qissi didn't have patience for Van Damme's nonsense and just shushed him. Michel went straight to Menahem Golan's office and asked him to intervene. Golan wasn't exactly in a hurry to jump in because Carl was a well-known Oscar winner editor for 1974 The Towering Inferno. Qissi said that with all respect to Carl, he can polish his Oscar statue all day long, but please, let me re-edit Bloodsport the way I see it. Not the whole movie, just fighting scenes. I wouldn't even touch the processed film, just negatives, it was way cheaper that way, and I would even pay for it. Just give me a chance to make it right. Let me pick one fight and show my vision to you. Fine, said Golan. Make a sample before you ruin the whole thing. Call me when it's ready. Michel went back to editing booth and reworked one of the fighting scenes with Jean-Claude. In few hours, they asked Golan to come over and take a look. The result was so good that even Carl said, wow! That was a green light for them to work on all of the fighting scenes for the entire movie with no Carl's supervision. When the movie came out for print screening, it made a number of people jealous and envious. Rumors have it that Michael Dudikoff and Chuck Norris went to Menahem Golan to complain about the movie and call it a pile of steaming crap. That was a devastating moment for both Qissi and Van Damme, a punch in the gut they did not expect to come from the colleague in the industry. Little did they know that there is no such thing as a camaraderie in Hollywood. It's a bunch of snakes and spiders in the jar. Jean-Claude had enough of this. Screw them, he said. Screw Hollywood. I'm heading back home. Van Damme had so many doubts about the quality of work and the movie in general, but Qissi, as always, stood his ground for both of them and convinced Jean-Claude that the movie is great, don't pay attention to haters, we're gonna get through this. So the movie was sitting on the shelf collecting dust for a long time because company did not want to release it after such poorly received reviews by so-called experts. Canal Group did not want to have anything to do with the movie and placed it on indefinite hold. So where do you go from here? Rescue boat came from Seasonal Film Corporation, a New World Picture, offering role for Jean-Claude in No Retreat, No Surrender, and later from the Imperial Entertainment Group to work in Black Eagle movie in Malta. Meanwhile, Michel learned that Menahem Golan will be visiting MIFED Film Festival for movies he has done for Chuck Norris, films like Missing in Action. Wasting no time, Qissi got on a plane and went back to US. He arrived to Golan office to plead to him to take Bloodsport to Milan as well. Knowing very well by now that Qissi wouldn't back off, to make it easy on himself, Golan agreed to take Bloodsport on a wild ride with him to Europe. Michel and Jean-Claude were not invited to join Golan entourage, so that they had to pay for their own air tickets and hotel to stay in Milan. Once in Italy, Qissi went all out looking for a movie distributor, anyone who would give Bloodsport a chance. During one of those lookouts, he met two movie distributors, Kim and Cam from Malaysia. They took interest in the movie and agreed to watch it. Michel was on the edge of his seat the whole screening and couldn't wait for the verdict. "So, how was it?" asked Michel. "We loved it," shouted Kim and Cam. "Let's make a deal." Qissi was very happy to share the news with Jean-Claude, but he gave the news a rather dismissive greeting, saying that that's just Malaysia, not big enough. "Well, who cares?" replied Michael. "They liked it." Qissi came back to Kim and Cam and offered help with movie promotions, but they didn't have budget to pay Michel. "No problem," he said. "Jean-Claude and I will do it for free." In Malaysia, Qissi and Van Damme staged several sparring fights in front of the theater to help with the exposure, signed autographs and greeted crowd. People were very nice to them and everyday tickets were sold out. In just few weeks, Bloodsport became an enormous hit in Malaysia, and soon enough, the word reached Menahem Golan. It shook Canal Group so hard that an immediate release was scheduled first on the east and then west coast of United States. Reporters called the movie a sleeper hit, huge success and box office triumph. With total budget of around 1.1 million and earnings of almost 12 million worldwide, It was Cannon's Group's most profitable film of 1988. Sure thing, a sequel was just a matter of time. Michel was asking Jean-Claude to stick with the franchise and make Bloodsport 2, 3, 4, etc., just like Stallone did with The Rocky, but Van Damme decided to choose a different path. Schwarzenegger's Terminator was on the rise and Claude wanted to jump on the hype train and do cyborg movie. He so wanted to be just like Arnold. Michel was not a big fan of cyborg idea, but not much he can do at that point arguing with the newborn movie star. Albert Pin, who wrote the screenplay for the 1989 movie Cyborg, didn't even consider sharing it with the Qissi for feedback. Horrible fight scenes, poor choreography, nothing that would make Cyborg as good as Bloodsport. Even then, Jean-Claude, did I mention his poor judgment earlier, wanted to continue this destructive path. Thank God and Mark decided to bring Kickboxer to life. But that's the story for the next chapter.
Kick the tree.